The wind came first, cold enough to flay the skin off a man's face, sharp enough to carve silence into bone. It howled through the empty street of Red River Junction, dragging dust and judgment in equal measure. They said the storm was coming, but the real storm was already here. Lila stood in the center of the square, wrists bound, hair whipping across her face like black silk caught in barbed wire. The rope around her neck wasn't just hemp, it was tradition, twisted tight, soaked in years of hate and habit. Someone in the crowd spat, someone else prayed. The sheriff wiped his mouth and turned to Jeb Carter, the rancher who'd been chosen to finish it, the man who'd never refused the town before. "It's your land," the sheriff said. "Your call." Jeb didn't move. Snow gathered on the brim of his hat, melting down into the lines of his weathered face. He'd strung cattle, hanged thieves, shot wolves, all without shaking once. But tonight, his hand trembled. "Please," the girl whispered. Not loud, just enough to reach the part of him he'd buried 20 winters ago. "Please, untie it." The words broke through the wind, fragile as glass, stubborn as prayer. For a heartbeat, Jeb saw not a thief, not a stranger, but his son. His boy, kneeling on that same frozen ground years ago, eyes wide before the mob, before the rope, before it all went wrong. The same fear, the same plea. "Pa, don't let them." The memory hit like a gunshot. The crowd grew restless. "Do it, Carter!" someone yelled. "She's one of them!" Jeb's jaw clenched. His breath steamed out, heavy, human. He could almost hear the rope creak, whispering the weight of 1,000 old sins. He'd lived by that sound. It kept the land orderly, the weak in check, the world simple. But mercy was chaos. Mercy made men question themselves. His fingers twitched near the knot. The girl's eyes didn't plead anymore. They waited calm, certain, almost forgiving. Jeb felt something inside him give. "Damn the law," he muttered, and the blade in his hand flashed once, cutting through the storm, slicing the rope in half. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. And somewhere deep within that silence, a man who'd spent his whole life keeping order finally let his heart break and breathe. They said Jeb Carter was a man the wind respected. Maybe because he never flinched when it cut. Maybe because he'd long ago become part of the same harsh land it came from. Folks around Red River Junction didn't talk much about feelings. They talked about fences, cattle, rain, and taxes. Out here, compassion didn't feed a family, discipline did. And Jeb had more of that than anyone alive. He ran the Carter spread 6,000 acres of dust, grass, and ghosts. His father carved it out with his own hands, fighting Comanches, droughts, and other men's greed. The family motto, carved into the barn beam, read, "Keep order, or be buried under chaos." Jeb lived by that like it was scripture. But order had a price. One he paid every night since his boy died. It happened 17 years back, during what the town called the Fence War. Land disputes between ranchers and native families spilled blood faster than whiskey. His son Daniel, only 19, had tried to stop a lynching. "They didn't steal the cattle, Pa. It's just drought, everyone's hungry." The boy's voice cracked with the kind of innocence that doesn't survive long on the plains. Jeb told him, "You don't stand between a man and his law." Daniel didn't listen. He stepped forward. The mob didn't listen either. In the confusion, a gun went off. And by the time the dust settled, his son was gone. Jeb never spoke his name again. The Carter house became a grave with walls. He buried his tenderness beside his boy and told himself that mercy kills faster than bullets. Since then, the town looked at him as the keeper of the code, the man who'd never hesitate when the rope was needed. Holt, the mayor, called him the backbone of tradition. But Jeb knew what Holt meant, the weapon that doesn't ask questions. And that worked for a long time. Until Lila came. She'd arrived in town just 3 weeks before the storm. Half-blood, they whispered. Part Apache, part white, which meant neither side would claim her. She worked at the stables, quiet, good with horses, never raised her voice. But prejudice doesn't need a reason, just a face that's different. So when sheep started dying, when someone whispered poison, the crowd didn't look for truth. They looked for an outlet. Jeb didn't think much of it at first. He'd seen plenty of witch hunts come and go. But then Holt came to his porch one morning with that politician's smile, the kind that hides a gun behind the teeth. "Jeb," he said, "the town's restless. They need to see order. She's not one of us, and she was found near the dead flock. If you handle it, we can all sleep better." Jeb nodded, but something about the way Holt said we twisted in his gut. He looked out over his land, the fence lines glinting under dawn, and thought about how quiet justice could be when no one listened. Later that night, he sat alone in his kitchen, whiskey in hand, staring at the old photograph of his wife and Daniel. The woman's silver bracelet gleamed faintly in the candlelight, the one he'd given her the winter before she died. When he turned it, he saw the inscription, "Love is what we keep, not what we take." That line hadn't crossed his mind in years, until, hours later, when they dragged Lila to the square and the moonlight caught the silver around her wrist, the same bracelet. That was when the past reached out and took his breath. Now, as the storm thickened outside, Jeb sat by the window, watching the snow bury the tracks of the crowd that had just left his land. Their torches flickered like dying stars down the road. He whispered to no one. Same rope, different name. Somewhere deep inside, a truth he'd fought for decades began to crack open. Maybe order wasn't the same as justice. Maybe the law wasn't the same as right. He poured the last of his whiskey and muttered, "You can build fences around a man's land, but not around his conscience." By morning, they would gather again in the square, waiting for him to make it official. And though the wind still howled like it always had, for the first time in 20 winters, it no longer sounded like something he should obey. Morning came late to Red River Junction. The sun barely climbed above the ridge, smothered by a wall of gray. Snow had buried the hoof tracks and the sins of last night alike. But word travels faster than wind in a small town. By the time Jeb Carter stepped out onto his porch, every face that mattered was already waiting at the gate. The preacher, coat buttoned to the neck. The mayor, smiling with that same easy corruption. And behind them, a crowd men with frozen beards and easy rage, women clutching their shawls like shields, children peeking through cracks of grown-up hate. "Morning, Carter," Holt called, voice syrupy as always. "We're gathering by noon. Folks expect the matter settled." Jeb said nothing. His boots crunched the frost as he walked past them toward the barn. The preacher's voice followed him. "The law must hold, brother. Mercy is for heaven, not earth." Jeb stopped, turned slightly. "Maybe heaven's tired of waiting." The preacher frowned. Holt cut in fast. "We all got our ghosts, Jeb. But this ain't about the past. This is about peace. The people trust you." He almost laughed at that. Trust, such a clean word for something so dirty. The kind of trust that asks you to kill so everyone else can sleep better. He saddled his horse in silence, every motion slow, deliberate. The smell of leather and dust filled the air, grounding him in something real, something older than guilt. The barn felt smaller than usual, as if the walls were closing in, stuffed with ghosts. Daniel's old saddle still hung near the back. The leather was cracked, the initials DC barely visible. Jeb ran his hand over it once, then grabbed his coat and rifle. He didn't plan to use the gun, but a man never walked into a mob unarmed. Down the hill, the church bell began to ring. Not for service, for spectacle. By the time he reached the square, the place was boiling. Snow turned to slush under boots and firelight. Holt stood on a crate, shouting words that smelled like justice but sounded like revenge. "We can't afford weakness. This town's built on strength, on order." The crowd roared approval. Lila was there too, tied again, her face streaked with dirt and blood. But her eyes, they were steady. She wasn't begging now. She was watching him, calm, almost sad, as if she already knew which way the wind would blow. "Step forward, Carter," Holt said, gesturing to the rope. "End this nonsense." The sheriff tossed him the knife. It landed in the snow with a dull thud. Jeb bent to pick it up. The handle was slick with oil, cold against his skin. He could hear his pulse louder than the crowd. "Keep order or be buried under chaos." His father's voice, the family motto, the chain around his heart. "Do it, Jeb," someone yelled. "She killed the sheep. You know it." He didn't answer. He just looked at the girl, then at the mayor. "Where's your proof?" he said quietly. The crowd hesitated. Holt smirked. Her hands were on the poison bag. "Who saw that?" "I did," said one of the men. He wouldn't meet Jeb's eyes. "Then why'd you wait till now to say it?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Holt's smile thinned. "Don't twist this, Carter. You think you're better than the rest of us?" "No," Jeb said, "just tired of being worse." A murmur became a growl. The mob swelled forward, breath heavy with fear disguised as certainty. Holt raised his hand for quiet, pretending calm but eyes sharp like a knife. "You forget, Jeb. Tradition's not just yours to break. It belongs to all of us. You think this town survives without law?" Jeb looked at him not with anger, but with something colder. "Maybe the law's what's killing it." "Oh." A woman gasped. The preacher crossed himself. Holt's face went hard. "Then you're no better than her." Jeb said nothing. He just stared at the rope frost, forming along its fibers, trembling in the wind like a heartbeat. Then he did something that no one expected. He stepped closer to Lila, close enough to see the bruises at her wrists, the way her breath trembled but didn't break. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. "You see that ridge over there?" She nodded. "That's where my son's buried. They said it was justice back then, too." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she whispered. "You're still breathing. That means you can change." Something in him cracked open, not loud, not visible, but real. The crowd waited, hungry for blood. The mayor shifted impatiently. Jeb turned to the preacher. "You ever think maybe God don't need more rope?" No one answered. The wind did instead, slamming through the square, rattling the church bell like it wanted to be heard. Jeb lifted the knife, stared at the knot. His hand was shaking again, not from fear, but from the weight of every ghost pulling him backward. "Carter," Holt barked. "Don't make me regret trusting you." He glanced back once, his voice low. "You already should." The crowd roared. Holt reached for his gun. And that's when Jeb finally made his move, a slow, deliberate step toward the rope, toward the point of no return. The world seemed to shrink around that single knot. The crowd, the noise, the cold, everything pressed in until it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Jeb Carter stood inches from the rope, the knife still in his hand. The blade caught a flicker of firelight, trembling like it too, wasn't sure which side of God it stood on. "Do it," Holt barked. His voice cracked like a whip. "Finish what you started, Carter, or the town will." Jeb's heartbeat thudded so loud it drowned out the bell. He could feel the crowd behind him shifting, whispering, feeding each other courage like wolves before the kill. He'd seen this before too many times. The faces changed, the cause changed, but the hunger stayed the same. They wanted purity. They wanted someone to bleed for their peace of mind. He stared at Lila. Snowflakes gathered on her lashes, but she didn't blink. That same eerie calm, like she'd already crossed whatever line waited beyond pain. "I didn't do it," she said softly. "But it wouldn't matter if I did, would it?" Jeb swallowed hard. "No," he whispered. "It wouldn't." Then Holt stepped down from his crate, closing the distance, his breath thick with whiskey and self-righteousness. "You think this is about her? It's about control, Carter. It's always been about control. You keep people scared, they'll keep the town clean. That's how the world stays simple." Jeb's jaw tightened. "Simple for who?" "For the ones strong enough to lead," Holt said. "You, me." He said it like they were brothers. That was the mistake. Jeb turned his eyes to the rope again. The knot seemed to pulse, alive with memory, his son's voice echoing under the noise. "Pa, don't let them." The blade flashed upward. A clean sound. The rope split. For a heartbeat. Silence. Then chaos. The crowd erupted in shouts and disbelief. Some surged forward, others stepped back as if the act itself burned. Holt lunged, yelling, "He's gone mad!" The sheriff reached for his revolver, but Jeb was faster. Not to shoot, to knock the gun aside, metal clattering into the snow. "No more killing!" he roared. His voice thundered across the square, filling the space where fear used to live. Lila stumbled free, clutching her bruised wrists. The rope dropped between them like a dead snake, the town's old god, finally lifeless. She gasped, chest heaving, eyes wide, not with terror, but disbelief. Holt recovered first. "You just damned yourself, Carter. You turned against your own people." Jeb's face hardened. "These are my people," he said quietly. "Even if they forgot what that means." A gun cocked behind him. The preacher's hands shook as he aimed the pistol. "Stand down, Jeb. You're blinded by guilt." M. Jeb took a slow step forward, his shadow falling across the man's boots. "Maybe, but guilt's all that separates a man from an animal." For a moment, nobody moved. The crowd, once so loud, now just breathed in unison, waiting to see who'd fire first. Then Lila's voice cut through it all. Calm, steady. "The mayor paid those boys to kill the sheep," she said. "He told them to blame my people so he could take their land." Holt froze. The preacher's pistol lowered, confused. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Lies," Holt shouted. "She's lying." But Jeb already saw the truth in his eyes, that quick dart sideways, the muscle twitch of a man exposed. "Then show your hands," Jeb said. "Show the silver on your wrists." Holt hesitated, but it was enough. Lila stepped forward, pulling something from her pocket, a torn scrap of the mayor's letterhead, smudged but legible, with his seal. "Payment for sheep disposal." Gasps. Someone cursed. The crowd rippled with doubt. Fear was no longer aimed at her, it was turning on him. Jeb took another step forward. "All this blood, all these years, you built your order on lies." Holt backed up, face pale. "You think one act of mercy changes anything? You think they'll forgive you for this?" Jeb's voice broke, not from weakness, but weight. "No, but maybe I can start forgiving myself." Holt's hand darted for his gun. Too slow. Lila threw herself forward, knocking his arm wide. The shot cracked into the air, echoing off the church wall, sending crows scattering like dark confessions. Jeb tackled Holt into the snow. The mayor went down hard, the wind punched out of him. The crowd held its breath as Jeb yanked the revolver from his grip and tossed it away. He could have ended it, could have done what they all expected. But instead, he stood up and stepped back. "It ends here," he said. "No more ropes, no more blood pretending to be justice." "Oh." The sheriff finally moved, shaking, confused. He picked up the fallen gun, eyes darting between the two men. Then slowly, he holstered it. The preacher crossed himself. "God help us." Jeb looked at him. Maybe he just did. Then the wind rose again, not sharp this time, but softer, carrying flakes of snow that glittered like ash. Lila stood beside him, silent, the rope at their feet half buried in white. Somewhere, a child began to cry. Then, a woman whispered, "He did the right thing." It spread quiet, uncertain, but real. Holt lay in the snow, beaten not by bullets but by truth. And Jeb just stood there, shoulders heavy, chest rising and falling like a man finally breathing clean air after years underground. He turned to Lila. "Go, before they change their minds." She shook her head. "Not without you." He gave her a faint, tired smile. "Then I guess we both broke something tonight." "Oh." The bell above them swayed in the wind, ringing once not for death this time, but for dawn. When morning came, the storm had spent itself. The snow lay still and perfect, hiding the sins of the night under a white that didn't mean purity, just exhaustion. Red River Junction looked cleaner, quieter. Too quiet. They said the preacher left town before sunrise. They said the mayor was under guard in his own house. They said a lot of things, the way people do when they're afraid of their own reflections. But nobody said Jeb Carter's name. By the time the sun cracked the ridge, he was already packing. Not much, just his coat, a Bible he didn't read, and a photograph of his wife and boy. The house groaned as he moved, wood settling like an old friend who knew goodbye when it heard it. He stopped by the barn last. Daniel's saddle still hung there, coated in dust and regret. He ran a gloved hand over the cracked leather. "You'd have been proud," he murmured, then stopped, because even saying that felt like a lie. Pride was what killed the boy. Obedience had buried him. Outside, his horse waited. The air smelled of iron and smoke, the lingering scent of burning fences. Someone had set part of his field on fire during the night. Tradition never dies quietly. He led the horse down the ridge, eyes on the horizon. The snow gleamed like glass, beautiful, indifferent. By the riverbank, he found her. Lila. Wrapped in a blanket, tending a small fire. She'd built it in the hollow of a fallen tree. the way native tribes did when they didn't want smoke seen. Her wrists were still raw, but her face was steady. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She looked up. "Neither should you." He almost smiled at that, almost. She poured him coffee from a tin pot. It was bitter, cold, and perfect. For a long time, neither spoke. The river was half frozen, creaking softly as the current fought against its own cage. Finally, Jeb said, "They'll come for me. Maybe today, maybe next week, but they'll come." "I know," she said. "You should keep moving. So should you." He shook his head. "This is my land, my curse. You were just caught in the crossfire." "No," she said. "I was the mirror." That made him look at her, really look. Her eyes held something he hadn't seen in years. Calm defiance. Not the kind born of hate, but of endurance. "You think I saved you," she said quietly. "But you saved me before that when you saw me as human. No one's done that in a long time." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The wind shifted, carrying a sound horses in the distance, faint but unmistakable. "They're coming," he said. She stood, pulling her shawl tighter. "Then it's time to choose again." He stared at the rifle strapped to his horse. He could fight. He'd fought all his life wars, droughts, his own ghosts. But this was different. There was nothing left to defend that wouldn't rot again in a season. He looked back at the farmhouse far off on the ridge. Smoke rising, maybe from the chimney, maybe from torches. He couldn't tell anymore. "I thought cutting the rope would set me free," he said softly. "Turns out, it just left my hands empty." Lila's voice was steady. "Freedom's not clean, Jeb. It's dirty. It costs everything." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess I finally paid." The riders appeared on the ridge 4, maybe 5. Town men, guns slung low. Jeb turned to Lila. "Go east. There's a canyon trail behind the rocks. It'll take you to the reservation lands." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." "I won't run." "Then don't run for me. Run for what's left of Mercy." For a heartbeat, she looked like she might refuse. Then she stepped forward and pressed something into his palm, her mother's bracelet. The same silver that had haunted his memory. "You keep it," she said. "You'll need reminding." Then she was gone, melting into the snow like smoke, silent and certain. Jeb stood alone as the riders closed in. His breath plumed in the cold, steady now. He didn't draw his rifle, didn't move. He just waited. When they reached him, no one spoke. The sheriff dismounted first. His eyes were tired, not cruel, just worn. "They want you gone," he said. "Exile, maybe worse." "I figured," Jeb said. "You could have run. Running's for men who think they're innocent." The sheriff hesitated. "What you did, it'll tear this town apart." Maybe it needed tearing. No one said another word. The men turned and rode away, leaving him standing in the snow, the wind tugging gently at his coat like a child unsure whether to let go. He walked back to the river and knelt by the dying fire. The bracelet glinted in his hand. For the first time, he slipped it on his wrist. It felt cold, heavy but right. He whispered, "You can't bury Mercy. It keeps digging its way back up." The clouds began to break then. Thin light spilled across the white fields, faint but warm. For the first time in 20 winters, Jeb looked at the dawn and didn't feel judged by it. The crowd would forget his name. The town would curse it. But maybe, somewhere down the line, a story would survive about the man who cut the rope and paid with his silence. He picked up his saddle and started walking. Each step sank deep, marking the snow behind him. Not footprints of escape, but of a man finally leaving his cage. And as the horizon blazed gold, the bracelet caught the light, a silver promise glinting against the cold, whispering the truth he'd finally learned. Mercy doesn't make you free, it makes you whole. Spring came late that year. The snow lingered like a ghost that didn't know it was dead. Red River Junction was quieter now, but not peaceful like a house where no one speaks after a fight that went too far. The mayor's trial was short. Guilt always leaves fingerprints, even when men try to scrub them clean with sermons and signatures. Letters surfaced, payments recorded. Holt's voice broke when the judge read the verdict. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy. He didn't hang, but the town hanged itself a little that day, stripped of the illusion that cruelty could ever be righteous. No one spoke of Jeb Carter during the hearings. Officially, he was gone, vanished into the mountains, exiled by silence. Unofficially, he was everywhere. His name whispered in the saloon, in the church pews, in the guilty pauses between prayers, the man who broke the rope, the man who broke the town's mirror. But far up in the hills, he wasn't thinking about any of that. He lived in a small cabin near the timberline, chopping wood, mending fences, learning how to breathe again. The days had no shape. He'd wake with the dawn, listen to the wind sweep through the pines, and sometimes speak to his boy's saddle as if the leather still remembered his touch. He thought he'd made peace with loneliness until one morning, a knock came at the door. When he opened it, Lila stood there. Thinner, tougher, the kind of strong you don't brag about because it's built from surviving. Behind her, the valley shimmered green for the first time in years. "I thought you were halfway to Mexico," he said. "I was," she answered. "But freedom's not a place, Jeb. It's a direction." He stepped aside. She entered, glanced around the sparse cabin. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, like the pause before a hymn. "I heard about Holt," he said finally. "Justice," she said softly, "or something close enough to pass for it." They sat by the fire, the light flickering over the walls. Jeb's hands looked older than he remembered. "They still hate you?" he asked. "They still hate themselves," she said. "They just don't know it yet." He smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher." She smiled back. "Maybe one day I will be. A different kind." They drank coffee in silence, the kind of silence that carries more truth than talk ever could. After a while, she said, "They'll come for you, Jeb. The lawmen. They'll say exile wasn't enough." I figured, "What will you do?" He stared into the fire. "Keep building fences. Maybe plant something." "On this rock?" He shrugged. "Something might grow." She reached into her satchel and placed something on the table, his wife's bracelet. She must have taken it back the night he told her to run. The silver caught the firelight, gleaming like a quiet pulse. "Keep it," she said. "You earned it." He shook his head. "No one earns mercy." "Then it's grace," she said. "And grace don't keep score." Her words hung there, soft as snow but heavy as truth. Later that afternoon, when the riders finally came, 3 lawmen and a deputy Jeb didn't hide, he stepped outside, coat buttoned, eyes clear. The lead marshal read the warrant, his voice steady but uneasy. "Jefferson Carter, by order of the Territorial Council, you are to stand trial for obstruction of justice and mercy." Jeb finished for him. The man blinked. "That's not a crime, sir." "Not yet," Jeb said. Leela appeared beside him, calm, unafraid. "He's not going anywhere without me," she said. The marshal hesitated, then nodded. "The town's different now. People talk about you both." "That a threat?" Jeb asked. "No," the man said quietly. "It's a start." They rode down together, no chains, no guns drawn, just the rhythm of hooves and the smell of thawing earth. When they reached the valley, people came out of their houses to stare. Some turned away, others nodded. Small gestures, but in towns like this, small was everything. At the courthouse, the preacher who once pointed a gun at Jeb offered him water. His hand shook. "You were right," he said. "Maybe God didn't need more rope." Jeb looked at him, not with pride, but with something gentler. "Maybe he needed us to stop pretending we're him." When the judge read the final ruling, it surprised everyone. No sentence, no pardon either. Just a single line entered into record. "Case closed in the interest of moral necessity." Outside, the air smelled of rain. Lila stood beside him, the first drops darkening her shawl. "So," she said, "what now?" He looked at the horizon. "Now we start over. Not clean, just honest." They walked down Main Street together. People watched, whispered, but didn't stop them. A child ran past, chasing a paper horse that fluttered and fell into a puddle. Lila picked it up, handed it back with a smile. The boy's mother looked at her, and this time, didn't look away. That tiny motion was worth more than 1,000 apologies. By dusk, the sky bled orange over the ridge. The bell that once tolled for death now rang for the evening service. A new preacher's voice floated through the air, gentle and unsure. Jeb turned to Lila. You ever think the world changes at all? She looked up at the bell tower, then back at him. Not all at once, just one mercy at a time. He nodded. The kind of nod that doesn't end a conversation, it carries it forward. As they reached the edge of town, the wind picked up again. It wasn't cold this time. It carried the scent of wet soil and lilac, the first flowers, daring to grow where blood had once soaked in. Jeb paused, turned back for one last look. The town looked smaller now, but somehow lighter. Guess the rope finally broke, he said. Lila smiled. No, you did. The rope just followed. He laughed, the first sound of peace in 20 winters. The camera of the story pulls back the two figures walking toward the hills, the sky stretching wide and gold above them, the bell fading into wind. And somewhere deep in that wind, faint but clear, the voice of a boy whispers through the years, You did it, Pa. Summer crept into the valley without ceremony. The grass grew tall where the scaffold once stood, bending in the same wind that used to carry judgment. No one talked about ropes anymore. They talked about crops, rain, and the sound the earth makes when it forgives itself. Up on the ridge, Jeb Carter's cabin stood half hidden in wildflowers. He'd torn down the old sign that said, Keep order. In its place, he carved new words, uneven but honest, let things grow. Most mornings, he rode down to town with a wagon full of timber. He'd trade boards for seed, nails, or just conversation. The same men who once shouted his name in anger now nodded, quiet, like neighbors learning a new language. Lila lived by the river, in the schoolhouse she built from the remains of the burned stables. Children of both bloods sat together there, tracing letters in the dirt, laughing at accents, forgetting which side of the fence their fathers were born on. Sometimes, when Jeb stopped by, she'd hand him a cup of coffee and he'd fix the roof while she taught the alphabet. The sound of her voice drifting through the open window felt like sunlight turned into words. One evening, as the sky blushed red over the hills, she walked with him to the ridge. The air smelled of cedar and smoke. You ever miss who you were? She asked. He thought for a long moment. Sometimes, he said, but then I remember who he cost me. She nodded. That's the thing about mercy. It doesn't erase pain, it gives it somewhere to rest. They watched the river shimmer below, the water carrying pieces of ice that hadn't melted yet, reminders that even winter leaves slowly. Jeb took the bracelet from his wrist, the silver now warm from skin, and looped it over a branch above them. For the next fool who needs reminding, he said. Lila smiled. That might be all of us. The wind rose, gentle, moving through the grass like a sigh. Somewhere far off, the church bell rang once, not a warning, not a command, just a sound. Jeb closed his eyes and listened. The world felt wider than it used to, and quieter in the right places. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel watched by ghosts. He felt accompanied by them. As the light faded, he whispered maybe to her, maybe to the land itself. Mercy didn't change the world. It just changed me. And that's enough. The camera drifts upward, the ridge glowing gold, two small figures framed against a horizon finally at peace. The bell fades into birdsong. The rope is gone. The dawn remains. If this story stayed with you, take a moment before the next thing pulls you away. Out here, in the quiet between words, mercy still matters. Maybe that's what stories are for, to remind us that gentleness is still strength and forgiveness is still possible. If it moves something in you, share it. Leave your thoughts below. I read everyone. And if you'd like to ride with us again through more tales of loss, courage, and the kind of healing that only the Wild West remembers, subscribe to NoNe Wild West Saga. We'll meet again at the next dawn.